The year is 2025, and the world is more connected than ever before. News travels at the speed of a tweet, and social movements can ignite overnight. Yet, beneath the surface of progress and innovation, there are truths that remain hidden, stories that rarely make the headlines, and realities that are often misunderstood or ignored. Systemic racism is one of those realities. It's a force that shapes lives, communities, and entire nations. Yet, it's often invisible to those who don't experience it firsthand. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. We're diving deep into the untold truth about systemic racism in 2025, how it operates, how it adapts, and why understanding it is more important now than ever before. Let's start with a simple question. What is systemic racism? It's not just about individual acts of prejudice or hate. It's about the structures, policies, and practices that create and maintain inequality, often without anyone having to say a single hateful word. It's the way schools are funded, the way neighborhoods are policed, the way job applications are filtered, and the way healthcare is delivered. It's the sum of 1,000 small decisions, each one seemingly neutral, but together creating a system that advantages some and disadvantages others. In 2025, many people want to believe that we've moved past racism. After all, we've seen historic firsts, more people of color in positions of power, more conversations about diversity and inclusion, more companies pledging to do better. But the truth is, systemic racism is not just a relic of the past. It's alive, it's evolving, and it's woven into the very fabric of our society. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, and insidious, hiding in plain sight. Consider education. In 2025, technology has transformed classrooms, but the old divides remain. Schools in wealthy neighborhoods have the latest devices, small class sizes, and well-funded programs. Meanwhile, schools in low-income, predominantly Black and brown communities struggle with outdated textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, and crumbling buildings. The digital divide is real, and it's not just about access to technology, it's about access to opportunity. Systemic racism means that a child's zip code can still determine their future. Or look at the job market. Artificial intelligence and automation have changed the way we work, but they've also introduced new forms of bias. Algorithms trained on biased data can perpetuate discrimination in hiring, promotions, and pay. A resume with a Black-sounding name is still less likely to get a callback. The language may have changed, but the outcomes remain the same. Systemic racism adapts to new technologies, finding new ways to exclude and marginalize. Systemic racism in 2025 is not just a matter of history. It's a living, breathing force that adapts to the times. As society evolves, so do the ways in which inequality is maintained. The language may be more polished, the policies more subtle, but the impact is just as real. To truly understand the untold truth about systemic racism, we have to look at how it morphs, how it hides, and how it persists even when everyone claims to be woke. Let's talk about housing. Decades ago, redlining was blatant. Maps were drawn, neighborhoods were segregated, and Black families were denied mortgages. Today, the lines are less visible, but the effects linger. In 2025, property values in historically redlined neighborhoods still lag behind, and access to affordable housing remains a struggle. Gentrification brings new investment, but it also pushes out long-time residents, erasing cultures and histories in the name of progress. Landlords use credit scores and background checks as gatekeepers, often reinforcing old patterns of exclusion. The result? A new generation faces the same barriers as their grandparents, just dressed up in modern language. Transportation is another area where systemic racism shows up. In many cities, public transit routes were designed decades ago to serve certain neighborhoods while bypassing others. In 2025, this legacy means that Black and brown communities often have longer commutes, less reliable service, and fewer options for getting to work, school, or healthcare. When new transit projects are proposed, they often prioritize wealthier, whiter areas, deepening the divide. The impact is not just inconvenience, it's lost time, lost opportunities, and a daily reminder of who is valued and who is not. Environmental racism is a term that's finally getting the attention it deserves. In 2025, climate change is no longer a distant threat, it's a daily reality. But not everyone feels its effects equally. Black and brown communities are more likely to live near polluting industries, in areas prone to flooding, or in neighborhoods with little green space. When disasters strike, these communities are hit hardest and recover slowest. The reasons are systemic: decades of disinvestment, discriminatory zoning, and a lack of political power. The result is a cycle of vulnerability that is as predictable as it is preventable. Let's not forget the digital divide. In a world where everything from job applications to doctor's appointments happens online, access to high-speed internet is a necessity. Yet, in 2025, millions of people, disproportionately Black, brown, and low income, still lack reliable internet at home. This isn't just about convenience. It's about access to education, employment, and civic participation. When the world moves online and you're left behind, the gap only widens. Systemic racism also shows up in the way laws are enforced. Take voting rights, for example. In 2025, new technologies have made voting more accessible for some, but new barriers have been erected for others. Voter ID laws, purges of voter rolls, and the closure of polling places in Black and brown neighborhoods all serve to suppress participation. The language is always about security and integrity, but the effect is clear. Some voices are silenced and the promise of democracy is undermined. Healthcare, too, is shaped by systemic racism in ways that are both obvious and hidden. In 2025, telemedicine and personalized medicine are revolutionizing care for many, but not for all. Black and brown patients are still less likely to receive pain medication, more likely to be misdiagnosed, and less likely to have access to specialists. Medical algorithms trained on biased data can perpetuate disparities in diagnosis and treatment. The result is a system that claims to be colorblind but continues to produce unequal outcomes. Education, often hailed as the great equalizer, is anything but. In 2025, school funding is still tied to property taxes, which means that wealthy, predominantly white neighborhoods have better resourced schools. Standardized tests designed decades ago still reflect cultural biases. Advanced placement and gifted programs are less accessible to students of color, and discipline policies disproportionately target Black and brown students. The cycle of disadvantage starts early and is reinforced at every step. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of systemic racism is the way it shapes our perceptions of ourselves, of each other, and of what is possible. Media representation has improved, but stereotypes persist. News coverage of crime, poverty, and protest is still shaped by race, often reinforcing fear and division. Social media can amplify voices, but it can also spread misinformation and hate. In 2025, the battle for hearts and minds is as important as the battle for policy and practice. So what can be done? The first step is to see systemic racism for what it is, a system, not just a series of isolated incidents. It's about patterns, not just anecdotes. It's about outcomes, not just intentions. Real change requires more than good intentions. It requires structural transformation. That means rethinking how we fund schools, how we design cities, how we deliver healthcare, and how we enforce laws. It means listening to those who have been marginalized, centering their voices, and sharing power. The untold truth is that systemic racism is not inevitable. It was built, piece by piece, over generations, and it can be dismantled the same way. But it will take courage, persistence, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. It will take all of us working together to create a future where opportunity is truly equal and justice is more than just a word.
In 2025, the conversation about systemic racism is more public than ever, but that doesn't mean it's easier. In fact, the more we talk about it, the more resistance we sometimes face. There's a growing backlash. People who claim that talking about race is divisive, that focusing on systemic issues is playing the victim, or that the real problem is reverse racism. These arguments are not new, but in the digital age, they spread faster and reach further, making it even harder to separate fact from fiction. This backlash is part of the system, too. It's a way of maintaining the status quo by shifting the conversation, by making people defensive, by turning calls for justice into accusations of unfairness. In 2025, we see this in debates over school curricula, where efforts to teach the true history of racism are met with cries of indoctrination or critical race theory panic. We see it in the workplace, where diversity initiatives are sometimes dismissed as woke politics or unfair advantages. The result is a climate where real conversations are stifled, and the work of dismantling systemic racism becomes even more challenging. But the truth is, ignoring systemic racism doesn't make it go away. In fact, it allows it to thrive. When we refuse to look at the data, to listen to lived experiences, or to question the systems we've inherited, we become complicit in their continuation. The untold truth is that silence is not neutral. It's a choice, and it has consequences. Let's look at the criminal justice system. In 2025, there are more cameras, more data, and more oversight than ever before. Yet Black and brown people are still disproportionately stopped, searched, and incarcerated. The reasons are complex: implicit bias, economic inequality, and policies that target certain communities. But the outcomes are clear. Families are separated, futures are derailed, and entire communities are destabilized. Reform efforts are underway, but progress is slow, and the system resists change at every turn. In the world of business, systemic racism shows up in hiring, promotion, and pay. In 2025, companies tout their diversity numbers, but the reality behind the scenes is often different. Black and brown employees are still underrepresented in leadership roles, still paid less for the same work, and still face barriers to advancement. The language of inclusion is everywhere, but the structures of exclusion remain. The untold truth is that diversity without real power sharing is just window dressing. Healthcare, too, is a battleground. In 2025, the pandemic may be over, but its lessons linger. Black and brown communities suffered higher rates of illness and death, not because of biology, but because of systemic factors: crowded housing, frontline jobs, limited access to care. The response was often too little, too late. Now, as the world moves on, these communities are left to pick up the pieces, facing long-term health and economic consequences. The untold truth is that public health is inseparable from social justice. Education remains a site of struggle and hope. In 2025, students are more diverse than ever, but the systems that serve them are slow to change. School funding formulas still favor wealthy districts, and standardized tests still reflect old biases. Efforts to diversify curricula and faculty are met with resistance, and discipline policies continue to disproportionately impact students of color. Yet, in the face of these challenges, students, parents, and educators are organizing, advocating, and demanding better. The untold truth is that change is possible, but it requires sustained effort and collective action. Housing is another front in the fight against systemic racism. In 2025, affordable housing is scarce, and gentrification is pushing longtime residents out of their neighborhoods. Policies that were designed to promote integration often end up reinforcing segregation. The result is a patchwork of opportunity where you live determines what you can achieve. The untold truth is that housing policy is racial policy, whether we admit it or not. Even in the world of technology, systemic racism finds new ways to persist. Algorithms that are supposed to be neutral often reflect the biases of their creators. Facial recognition software misidentifies people of color at higher rates. Automated decision-making in hiring, lending, and policing can perpetuate old patterns of discrimination. The promise of technology is equality, but the reality is often the opposite. The untold truth is that systems are only as fair as the people who build and use them. So what does it take to confront systemic racism in 2025? It takes more than awareness. It takes action, policy changes, resource allocation, and accountability at every level. It takes listening to those who are most affected, centering their voices, and sharing power. It takes a willingness to be uncomfortable, to make mistakes, and to keep going anyway. The untold truth is that systemic racism is not just a problem for some of us, it's a problem for all of us. It limits our potential, divides our communities, and undermines our democracy. But it is not inevitable. It can be challenged, changed, and ultimately dismantled. The work is hard, the path is long, but the future depends on our willingness to face the truth and act on it.